you everyone for having me. I'm very excited to be here. Again, my name is Anita. My pronouns are she and her. I am a white female and I'm wearing eyeglasses and I have long dark hair, but I've put a bit of red in it. And the reason I've chosen red is because natural redheads are my absolute favorite. So I try to put a little bit of red in my hair. And I did want to share with everybody that my view during the presentation, I do only have the presentation slide deck in front of me. And Joanna, I believe, will be happy to let me know if there are any technical issues or if anyone has a request for me to slow down or repeat anything. I believe Joanna will let me know. And I'm not going to be monitoring chat just because my view is the deck. So for the presentation, it'll be much more a read through, and then very much looking forward to the ending when we have the opportunity to save the questions for the end for Q&A, and then we'll be able to meet and have a conversation. So I will be reading everything on the presentation as well as describing the images and videos within. And we did provide the slide deck in advance if anybody needed to take a look at that prior to getting started. So thank you again for joining. I'll go ahead and get going on the presentation. I have our title screen on, and I have this is Inclusive Design, the welcome mat of user interfaces, 13 October. And again, my name is Anita. I'm a senior accessibility designer with This is Inclusive Design. And on the screen, I do have an ID logo for inclusive design and the Scottish Tech Army with multicolored bars to get us going. Okay. So again, very happy to be here, very happy to share about inclusive design and my experience with that. So for our key takeaways, we will explore what exactly is inclusive design. We'll talk a bit about the social model of disability, touch on inclusive user research, and what accessibility is not. So that's kind of helpful as well to describe what it is as well as what it's not. And I have created 3 C's that lead to inclusion. And a fun bit, I believe, is that the first C has already been accomplished by you joining the talk or watching the replay after the presentation or listening to it. So, as a really brief introduction, I like to describe the work that I do. I summarize it by sharing that I reduce friction and increase flow of digital experiences of disabled persons and users of assistive technology in partnership with the disability community. I am a member of an association called the International Association for Accessibility Professionals, and I am a certified professional in accessibility core competencies. And I'm also an American Sign Language student, which is a beautiful language, and did find it's a very, very different, entirely different than British Sign Language. There's full versions of sign language, so that's just the way it is. I did practice with one of my dear friends in Edinburgh, and we were comparing. I do also volunteer with LGBT Youth Scotland and the Cairngorms National Park Authority on their Equalities Advisory Panel, in addition to the Tech Army. So that's just a very quick introduction about me. And then we'll get into what is inclusive design. So I wanted to share that, simply put, inclusive design is you. It's me. It all begins right there. And what I mean by that is if you are already within the design community, whether it be user interfaces, user experience, user research, or you're interested, then you're already a part of inclusive design. So each of our design decisions that includes input from disabled users helps to create an equitable, inclusive, and more human-centered future that acknowledges a full range of human diversity. And then for folks that have joined us that are specialized in user research, which is brilliant. Each time you recruit and include disabled people, individuals that use assistive technologies and adaptive strategies, you end up with a sample that is more fully representative of all users. So inclusive design does touch on a number of areas and a wide range of perspectives and lived experience. So if we want to dig into it with a few examples of what inclusive design involves, the Nielsen-Norman Group, which is a global research group, shares a few recommendations when designing interfaces that allows people to describe themselves in their own terms. And I just picked 3 examples, which kind of just barely touch on the wide scope of inclusive design. So for example, turning a one choice only radio button into a select all that apply checkbox for race or ethnicity, letting people choose their own gender identity categories, or provide the option not to describe themselves if the information is not required. If the information is required, it's important to let people know why that data is being requested and what it will be used for. Letting people make sure that your system speaks their language by allowing users to change the default of English when needed. So inclusive design does take into consideration race, ethnicity, gender identity, language, and it does encompass many different areas. So it's a very broad reach. And it's really about just taking into account and expanding our perspectives in the design community, that there are a number of different ways that people may interact with your designs. Okay. And I wish to share, why is inclusive design so important? So I do specialize specifically on the digital experiences for disabled users. And I'll be talking more in depth about that particular area within the inclusive design focus. So by prioritizing accessibility and disability inclusion, design community can co-create amazing experiences for all users, which is fabulous. And of course, what we hopefully are all very interested in and want to work towards. So by addressing accessibility early and often and iteratively in our processes, we can proactively collaborate with disabled users, researchers, and other teams as well, and ensure that every user's needs are met throughout the digital experience. And by doing so, we foster change that increases brand value by reaching and serving a largely untapped market. So I wish to share a little bit about when you're just starting to get into focusing on the digital experiences of disabled users. You may hear a bit about, it's called the social model of disability, and it's a very important guiding principle. So I wanted to share that with everyone. Disability in reference to the social model is that disability is caused by a mismatch between design and the person. So to further explain that, it's not about the person's abilities or impairments that make them disabled, but rather it's about their interactions with design, their environment, and the barriers that exist in society. So inaccessible design, essentially, that is not available to users of different assistive technology or adaptive strategies, that kind of design is disabling and essentially acts as a "we're closed" sign, if you will, on the virtual door to our digital products, services, and solutions. It does lock people out. It's the opposite of the welcome mat. So when designs and code provide the flexibility to meet all users' needs, we provide a welcome mat that invites everyone in, including users with different backgrounds and ways of interacting with our designs. So I personally am a very visual learner, and in order for me to fully comprehend and understand concepts, it helps for me to have something to visually reference. I have a 1-minute video that demonstrates exactly what I just went over for the social model of disability. And I have it in the next slide, and I hope it is successful. I put it into the presentation so that I wouldn't have to stop share and go over separately to YouTube. So we'll test that and hope that the video will play. I'll do a setup and also do a video, a scene description after we go through the video. So go next. So next on this screen, I do have a screenshot of the video, and I'm going to play it, and then I'll check in to make sure, hopefully, that it's playing successfully. It's just 1 minute and goes very quickly, but it demonstrates this model.
Hello, I'd like to open a bank account. Two can be as bad as one. It's the loneliest number since the number one. No is the saddest experience you'll ever know. Yes, it's the saddest experience you'll ever know.
All right, I'll pause that. On the end of that video, there was some Braille displayed. So we'll go next. Okay, so I wish to do some audio description of that 1-minute video. This was a previous advertisement from a French company, and at the end, their theme for this 1-minute video was that the world is harder when it's not designed for you, which is a very visual description of what the social model of disability is, regarding the barriers that exist in the world around us when designs are not created with everyone in mind. So this video depicted a non-disabled people trying to live in a world that was designed and built for people with disabilities. So in the different scenes, we had a person that was not in a wheelchair, was disadvantaged, and then a person who didn't know sign language was disadvantaged and encountered barriers, as well as a person who didn't read Braille was disadvantaged. So that is a very powerful, I believe, demonstration of what this is all about. So to go further into some different areas in which we work with different types of users that are using assistive technologies to navigate digital space, and as well adaptive strategies. There, I have pulled up a slide with a chart that's been pulled from and adapted from the Microsoft Inclusive Design Kit. And it is a chart that describes permanent, temporary, and situational disabilities. It's organized into 3 rows describing permanent, temporary, and situational, as well as 5 different columns for touch, see, hear, speak, and cognitive. So for example, if we are reviewing the column for hear, a permanent disability is deafness, a temporary disability may be an ear infection, and then a situational disability is noisy surroundings. So that I would think of like a bartender in a pub, in a noisy pub, may not be able to hear so well, depending on those circumstances. So when it comes to disability, and we really start to think about it, especially in this very simplified chart that is exploring permanent, temporary, situational, it's not a matter if we ourselves have disabilities or not. It's just a matter of time. So you may encounter disabilities just situational, temporarily. You may have been born with disabilities, and they're permanent, or you may encounter an accident. Or, of course, if we have the good fortune of living very long lives, we may have diminishment of some of these abilities. So it's not a matter of if, it's just much more a matter of when. And there's a beautiful quote from a Dr. Stephanie Cawthorn that I love, and it's very simple. Disability is human. Disability is all of us. So just kind of fully understanding that and exploring that. So I wish to touch on inclusive user research really briefly. I had the amazing opportunity within inclusive design with my healthcare company that I work with. We had a very specifically focused inclusive user research group. And so I wish to share a couple of best practices and takeaways that I learned from working with that inclusive user research group. I do have a statistic here about 16 million people. There are 16 million people with a disability in the United Kingdom as of 21-22 survey. And that represents 24% of the total population. So nearly 1 of every 4 people have shared and disclosed that they have a disability. So if we're not recruiting and including disabled people, we end up with a sample that is not truly representative. So that's why it's so important to include everyone and have that diversity represented. And a recommendation is to engage with our colleagues. Our colleagues may have lived experience with disabilities or may know individuals who may be a match for research, and that everything is interconnected. So if we're creating inclusive work environments and people do feel welcomed, of course, to share and disclose and share their expansive experiences and working with assistive technology and using adaptive strategies, then we can tap into that and learn from their perspectives. And just a note on personas, that utilizing personas may increase awareness, but a simulation is never true representation of lived experiences. So personas really shouldn't be used as a substitute for including disabled users into user testing. It's great for, like we said, expanding awareness within user research, but the gold standard is always talking directly with disabled users. Some UK agencies that do provide disabled user research and user testing services, an organization called AbilityNet, and there's another one called Research Institute for Disabled Consumers. And I personally have experience with AbilityNet. They're an amazing resource. They offer many free resources, tools and training and webinars, and they do have some paid services as well, but that one is one that I'm familiar with. And a dear friend of mine is also a volunteer, an active volunteer with AbilityNet in Edinburgh. It's just great. Okay, and then the next bit is maybe to make it a little bit more clear when we're talking about digital accessibility, what it is not. So when we are talking about all of this, accessibility is actually not a checklist within the design process. It's much more of a conversation, it's a journey, and it takes time, and there's definite ways to approach it. For sure. It's not, it's not something that's a quick fix. It's also not the responsibility of our developer partners alone. If we're within the design community and we think, well, isn't that when we're talking about creating experiences that are accessible to everyone, wouldn't that just be semantic HTML that the developers might have to address? And we do have talented developers that focus on accessibility, but we're partners with that. Accessible and inclusive design actually begins right at the design level at the ideation stage, and then flows directly through to the next phases. So it's also not limited to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and that abbreviation, if you're interested in and have already explored a bit about digital accessibility, you may have heard about WCAG. Those are standards and that we refer to, and those are guiding. They have guiding principles as well as very detailed guidelines that we follow, and it's not just limited to that or laws. The Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are actually sort of the foundation to get started, and then work from there to make things much more usable, equitable, and accessible. And then another note we wish to share is about overlays, plugins, and widgets. We do know that technology is changing very, very rapidly, probably even day to day. There are some companies out there that are providing they're actually marketing some solutions that they say automatically detect and fix web accessibility issues by simply adding in a line of code to the back end of a website. And that is inaccurate as well as deceptive. And so to further make a point about that, I am going to show this briefly and describe, just to let everybody know a visual reference of what I may be referring to for an overlay, widget, or plugin. I have a small image of a overlay icon, which often looks like a little human being in a circle, and it will float on one of the edges of the screen. And when you click on that icon, it may bring up a menu that says accessibility adjustments. And that's why it's called an overlay, because it sits on top of a website. And then I do have just a placeholder image with the link that I'd love to invite everyone to take a look at our accessibility guidelines. And the reason I have this in here is just to explain that there aren't any overlays, plugins, widgets, which can fix all of the information in the background of a website. That does require human review, human manual interaction and testing, and it means interpretation based on the context of our websites and as well as our mobile apps. So the guidelines are pretty comprehensive. There are 4 principles. There's 13 guidelines, in which there are 87 now, 87 success criteria. So one line of code that sits on top of a website is not able to do the interpretation and determination and testing and interaction that a human can do. And then there's a lot that I thought I might be able to share about that, but wanted to, Gold Standard is actually talking with disabled users, and that's, I hope, is the biggest takeaway from today's talk. And I wish to introduce you to Haben Girma. And then this is a very brief video from Haben Girma, who happens to be a human rights lawyer, the first ever deafblind graduate from Harvard Law School. And Haben talks about avoiding some of these overlay and widgets and plugins, claiming to provide accessibility as a quick and easy fix. Because they're actually not, and these companies are being sued, at least in America, are being taken to account for the claims that they're saying can't happen. So I'm going to click play to share with you Haben Girma.
Haben speaking. Hello. There
Turning
are
on
companies
caption.
out there that are claiming you can add one line of code to your website and it will be fully accessible to blind and disabled people. Beware of companies claiming to use AI solutions to make websites accessible. AI is a tool, and right now it's extremely limited in what it can do for accessibility. I gave examples of auto captioning in my last video. Auto captioning turns my name, Haben Girma, into Happen Grandma. Imagine if you are a deaf person relying on the captioning and it's auto captioning. You miss out key terms, important details if you're only relying on AI-based solutions like auto captioning. So it's a myth out there that you can rely on AI for all your accessibility needs. AI is great in certain very specific situations. But these companies out there, there are many of them, so it's not just one. They're claiming you can add one line of code and then your website will be accessible given their AI-based accessibility solutions. It's extremely frustrating to me and many of my blind friends that millions of dollars are being poured into these companies. One of these companies is called Accessibly, and I went to their website. I'm blind, I'm a screen reader user, so I navigate websites using a screen reader. And on their own website, I encountered barriers. If I'm finding barriers on their own website, how can I trust them to make other websites accessible? I don't trust them to make other websites accessible. And I'm not the only one. Over 400 accessibility experts and allies have signed a document describing the harms these services cause. Beware of companies claiming to use AI-based solutions to make websites accessible. Avoid these companies. Take full responsibility for accessibility. Disabled people are 1 billion people around the world. That's a huge market. When you invest in accessibility, you get more customers, more revenue in the long run, and your product is better overall. Invest in real accessibility solutions. If you enjoyed the video, drop a comment.
Okay. So that is a well-respected self-advocate, Haben, who also has a memoir and has created several TED Talks, which are amazing, and does advocacy very proactively.
Like the video or subscribe to the channel.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Now, this is actually a wrap up prior to our half an hour kind of mark for our break, and then we would come back just to wrap up this bit of the presentation where it's more of a read through of the slide deck. The last screen here is the 3 C's that lead to inclusion. And in our introduction and the key takeaways, I had said that you'd already accomplished the first one, which is curiosity. Simply by joining and being open to learning a bit more about inclusive design and how that can actually be a welcome mat to invite everyone in from all backgrounds, perspectives, and different ways of navigating and using design. You've already done that by having curiosity, by joining, by listening or watching to the replay. And that can segue really beautifully into care. You can think now you're expanding your horizons, you're broadening your perspectives, and now that you actually care about this and want to make sure that your designs are usable and equitable and actually accessible in moving forward. And then the next step within that are having conversations with disabled users. That's your colleagues, your loved ones, your community, your customers. That's amazing, and that's what I want to really recommend, is having those conversations and inviting in those perspectives and that expertise. And yeah, that is brilliant. So just to wrap up, every decision that we make in our design communities can either create or remove obstacles for people to participate in society. So it's a very beautiful thing to work and to be interested in, and to be involved within. Accessibility does begin with design, right from the very beginning, when we talk about ideation and bringing all of our partners in at that stage. And accessibility first approach to design systems is definitely the goal. And so before we take our break, I'll just let you know that I do have my contact information. I am available on the Scottish Tech Army Slack channel to reach directly if you like to connect that way, as well as my LinkedIn link is in here. And I have provided a list of resources. It's a pretty comprehensive list. Also includes the different resources that we touched on. For example, if you'd like to take a look at full screen for the placeholder image on our accessibility guidelines map, we also have the different UK-based user research groups and the overlay fact sheet that Haben Gurma had mentioned, to learn a bit more about overlays and plugins and widgets.